Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming back for this afternoon session of our future, the future with high-speed broadband. We are going to continue our international flavour with a quick trip around, unfortunately, still some more Anglo-centric places, but get a view from the UK, from across the ditch, and from Canada on a range of related issues. The first two speakers will be before the afternoon tea break, third speaker, and then we have a panel to wrap the day on the international perspectives. There is one other correction I need to make. In my closing comments in the last panel, I made some reference to something I wasn't allowed to talk about. And someone asked me, have I been gagged by the organisers? And the short answer is no, but my day job at the moment is working as a part-time temporary special advisor to the Minister for Broadband Communications and the Digital Economy in Australia, Senator Stephen Conroy. So I'm doing my darndest to not roam into the realm of policy issues in Australia. So that was that reference. And I'm quite free to say anything I like about New Zealand. It's just Australia I can't talk about. That then brings us to a different place, which is the UK, and our first speaker, Antony Walker. Now, Antony is the chief executive of the Broadband Stakeholder Group in the UK, which was set up by the UK government to advise on the development and implementation of the UK's broadband strategy. Like many such groups, I'm thinking about Canada 2.0, it's actually based in a trade association, Intellect, where Antony is also the Director of Strategy and Communications. He's going to share with us some information about a study they've been doing on the demand in the UK, and hopefully definitely provide us with some thoughts for our own consideration in New Zealand. So would you please welcome Antony Walker.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Some fantastic feedback on the Twitter feed there about the morning session. Best broadband live stream ever. Best panel ever. No pressure then for this afternoon. Lots of people predicted all sorts of things about the impact of digital convergence, but how come nobody ever predicted the unbelievable ubiquity of Stephen Fry? I mean, what next? We're all going to have a little sort of Stephen Fry avatar that's going to follow us around like Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars. He seems to be everywhere. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Antony Walker. As mentioned, I run something called the Broadband Stakeholder Group in the UK. And we also have been particularly interested in this issue around demand. Lots of talk about supply, much less talk about demand. So we're kind of keen to get more of a feel for what was actually happening. Now, the morning session focused very much on the future, the kind of futurology part. We've sort of looked at it slightly differently and said, well, what's actually happened in markets where superfast broadband has been deployed, and what does the take-up look like? And so I thought I might as well start off with probably the biggest cliche in broadband conferences, which of course is this working? Yeah. Nope. There we go. Finally, the field of dreams. Build it, and they will come. So did they? What's actually happened in markets around the world where broadband, superfast broadband, has been deployed? And actually, oh, hang on, there we go. There's one thing that hasn't been super fast, and that's been adoption. With the exception of Asia and a few of the BRIC economies, consumers haven't exactly been rushing to take up superfast broadband services. And in some countries, actually, even where they've deployed fibre, there's not a lot that's super fast about the broadband access that's provided on those fibre connections. Some of those speeds are really pretty modest indeed. And as you look across a number of economies there from the USA, France, UK, Netherlands, I mean, in terms of the actual take-up of superfast broadband as a proportion of total broadband shares, still really modest. So kind of what's going on? What's been happening? So that's what I'm going to talk about. First, I should probably just explain a little bit more about the Broadband Stakeholder Group. As mentioned, we were set up way back in 2001 by the then Labour government. We're a kind of cross-industry advisory group that we report to government on broadband issues. And we function, I suppose, a bit more like a think tank. We're certainly not a lobby group. We're not there to lobby for broadband. We're not there to lobby for ISPs or anybody else. What we do is bring people together from across that ecosystem, from ISPs, mobile operators, technology vendors, broadcasters, content owners, community and consumer bodies, to provide a kind of central locus, a central place where people can come together, share ideas, and discuss some of the kind of pressing challenges and problems in the broadband market. We have direct engagement from the regulator, from Ofcom in the UK, and also from the key government departments. And as I said, we're really there to address kind of technology issues, infrastructure issues, but also the kind of commercial, consumer, and obviously the demand side. Importantly, worth noting that we're sponsored by a combination of industry, sponsors, and government. But as I said, we're not there to lobby. I'm not here representing any particular interest. I'm here very much with a kind of UK PLC hat on. And hey, people love talking about fibre. I love talking about fibre. I've been talking about fibre for quite a long time. BSG published a big report in the UK back in 2007 that really sort of stimulated a lot of the debate in the UK in policy circles around how we were going to deliver next generation broadband in the UK. We've done lots of detailed work on cost modelling, fibre deployment, and as well as wireless networks and satellite networks in the UK. Those cost models are used by government, used by the regulator, and underpins a lot of their work. And we did a lot of work that really focused on the challenges of rural broadband in the UK. We call it the so-called final third, the final third of UK homes where we felt the market wasn't going to deliver without some subsidy. Now that government has agreed to put some subsidy in, we work very closely with government on some of the detailed work underpinning the UK's kind of rural broadband strategy. So I love broadband as much as anybody else, and I love fibre as much as anybody else. And government targets, hey, around the world, we've got governments sort of universally sort of announcing that they want to be the best, that they want to have the best, fastest networks, the most ubiquitous take-up, and that's been kind of super fast, that kind of adoption of those government targets. But whilst policy people, tech people, governments have been sort of fascinated by fibre, consumers seem to have been less fascinated. Things that really turned them on have been mobile. We've seen really dramatic growths in terms of mobile access to the internet, as we heard this morning. And of course, the other thing is social. I mean, that's been the massive, big story of the last few years. So what's going on? How come we're all talking about fibre, consumers are all out there talking about mobile, talking about social? Well, that's exactly what we wanted to try and find out a bit more about. And so we set about doing our own bit of research to look back at markets around the world where fibre has been deployed or superfast broadband has been deployed for at least 12 months. And we wanted to sort of understand what the demand curve starts to look like in those markets and the factors that was sort of influencing the shape of that demand curve. So there you've got the kind of typical demand curve. I mean, that was first generation broadband adoption in the US, fairly standard broadband adoption curve, fairly rapid levels of take-up. I mean, that was kind of what we all got used to, right? And at the beginning of last decade. But I think this time it's going to be a bit different. The market this time around, I think, is a bit more complicated. There are more products out there that are potential substitutes. There are important adjacent markets that seem to have an impact on the level of take-up. So I think the whole picture this time around is going to be a bit more complicated. Probably worth mentioning that when we talk about superfast, we define that as kind of anything that's beyond the capability of ADSL 2+ over copper. In the UK, that basically means anything kind of above 20 megabits and beyond. So that's kind of where we put the term superfast. And I should also say that this work is kind of ongoing. These aren't final conclusions I'm presenting today, but much more are kind of interim initial thoughts. And I'm here to learn as much as anybody on this subject over the next 2 days. So the markets that we've taken a look at, the US, a number of markets around Europe, and then Far East in terms of Japan, South Korea, and Hong Kong. And the work that we did was really to trawl through all of the kind of company reports from operators in those markets going back several years to really try and get out as much data as we could about what was actually happening in those markets once superfast broadband was deployed. So we've got some data sets together for about 50 operators in these target markets, and data goes back probably a good number of years in some cases. But notes of warning. The data out there is pretty patchy, so it's really quite difficult to put this picture together. Obviously, broadband's normally bundled with other services, which makes it really difficult to compare services and prices on a like-for-like basis. And more challengingly, many operators don't actually report take-up numbers for different packages and different speeds, and in particular, cable operators tend not to report those kind of numbers, and that puts a big hole in some of our numbers. So please be aware of that. But also remember this point: fiber doesn't always necessarily mean super fast. There are several operators in several countries that offer basically first-generation services over the fiber infrastructure that they've built out, and I'll go into that in a bit more detail. So you know, fiber doesn't always mean super fast. I think that's an important thing to bear in mind. And also there's the supply issue. Building these networks takes a lot longer than compared to rolling out ADSL networks at the start of the last decade. And obviously that has an impact, sort of kind of depresses the demand curve because you're rolling out more slowly, so that in terms of your footprint, it grows more slowly, and therefore the take-up levels are a bit depressed. I think it was Gerd earlier in the session this morning who mentioned the William Gibson quote, you know, the future has already arrived. I think to complete the quote, I think it went something like, it's arrived, but it's just not evenly distributed. And that's pretty much the story of superfast broadband adoption around the world. Far East definitely hit critical mass. You know, we've got almost a majority of, not quite there yet, but almost a majority of superfast broadband connections when you look across Japan, South Korea, and Hong Kong. They've really sort of bridged the chasm. They've made that leap across to superfast. The US, some way behind. About 10% of all broadband connections are superfast, i.e. they are kind of on some form of fiber-based network, whether it's FTTC or FTTH. And Europe really lagging some way behind at only kind of 2% of all broadband connections. So a tale of three continents, really, three very different stories in terms of what's going on. And I think you know, there you see the kind of the figures sort of broken down for each country. So South Korea sort of leading in terms of penetration of all households, Japan following close by, and Hong Kong, and then a massive drop down to US, and then the European countries that we've had a look at. Now you could of course argue that, well, isn't this just a factor of time and time for deployment? Because we all know that you know, Japan, South Korea, and Hong Kong started to deploy earlier, certainly than Europe and the US. And to some extent, that's probably true. So I think you need to certainly take that into account. But then again, if you look at the US, 2006, services started being deployed. Germany, 2006. France, not far behind in terms of when they first started to deploy. So actually, you would think that in some of these markets we would have seen higher levels of take-up. But actually, these supply curves, they look quite different to the supply curves of broadband first time around. And whereas Far East has definitely seen that kind of kick up, actually, if you look at a lot of other countries, things have been quite modest. So this is definitely looking like a different picture. And as I said, when you look at penetration of homes passed, so you're not actually looking at total numbers, you're looking at the penetration based on how far operators are deployed out to. Even then, it's still looking fairly modest. So quite an important question, really, in terms of why is that the case? What's different this time around? And is there anything that governments or regulators or anybody else should be doing about that? Or is that just a natural evolution of this technology compared to broadband first time around? So in thinking about demand for superfast broadband, and remember, this is demand. This is about what would drive you to upgrade from your current generation broadband service to a superfast broadband service. It really seems to us that there are kind of four sort of key variables. One around, obviously, price. How much do you have to pay? What kind of premium do you have to pay to get access to a higher service? The second one is around kind of the speed differential. Because as I said, there's a wide variety of kind of speeds here in terms of things that are called superfast. So does it make a difference if you're on a very slow broadband connection today and you have suddenly a 20 megabit service is made available to you? Or what about if you're on a kind of 10 megabit service today and suddenly you've got a 50 meg service available to you? Does that have any impact? Thirdly, the service bundle themselves. I mean, how is the service made available? How is it packaged to the consumer? And then finally, kind of substitutes and other relevant services, other things that can have an impact on both the supply of a service and demand for it. So those were kind of the four kind of variables that we thought were kind of relevant and we're looking at in each market. So what I'm going to do is do a very quick kind of trundle through those three continents and just kind of highlight some of our kind of headline observations, really, rather than trawling through all of the detail and all of the data, but some headline observations. So Far East. I suppose the interesting one here is Japan. So when fiber started to be deployed in Japan, I mean relatively very, very early to almost any other market back in sort of 2003. Really very quickly, demand kind of kicked up, and we started to see the number of non-fiber subscriptions, starting to decline as fiber kind of came into the market. Now, for any kind of broadband evangelist, anybody who really thinks that this stuff is transformational, that's the kind of thing you want to see. That's the kind of incarnation of everything you think about is great about fiber and it's transformational and that consumers are going to flock to this stuff. Unfortunately, Japan looks pretty much like an exception, certainly in the markets that we've looked at. South Korea was quite a lot slower to get going. And actually, the curve, I haven't put it on here, but the curve for Hong Kong is pretty similar to the South Korean one. And actually, in Hong Kong, it's quite interesting that in terms of the kind of financial inducements that some of the operators kind of put into the market to try and get people to take up broadband in the early stages, you could pretty much get your choice of kind of consumer good kind of bundled in for free with your broadband access. And the most popular deal was to get a free air conditioning unit with your fiber. I guess that's something most people hadn't really thought about. So even in Asia, even in the sort of fastest growing markets, Japan, yeah, it was quick, but South Korea and Hong Kong were a bit slower. And actually, certainly in South Korea, what happened was the operators just started upgrading people. They just kind of moved people across to to superfast services and pretty much kind of gave the service away. And that's certainly kind of borne out when you look at the pricing of a lot of these products in these markets, which really says that now, and this comes back to my earlier warning point, pricing is really difficult to kind of unbundle kind of exactly what it is you're paying for and what you're being charged for. But in most of these markets, we saw kind of almost no premium being charged. And in some cases, actually, fiber and real superfast services were being sold and provided at a lower cost than competing DSL services. But even when that was the case, Korea Telecom and others had to upgrade people. They still had to actually just, even when there was a cheaper service out there were instances where the operator would just kind of bump people up to the higher speed. So really the story in Asia is one of, as ever, kind of complex pricing regimes around some of these products, but no real significant price premium discernible. Certainly very high-speed services being made available at no premium. Importantly, what we haven't seen there is IPTV being bundled in with the fiber products. This was pretty much companies just selling raw broadband connectivity. They weren't trying to bundle in a kind of replication of a cable TV model alongside the IPTV. And of course, in terms of substitutes, well, as we all know, Asia, very, very high levels of take-up of mobile broadband. So the two looking very much like complementary services there, much less than substitutes. So that didn't seem to have a sort of a dampening impact. Now, of course, the Asian model is absolutely enabled by the kind of cost structures that you have in those countries. They have very high levels of population density. Large numbers of people in South Korea, for example, and Hong Kong living in multi-dweller units. High density, able to do overhead deployment and so on, means that you can deploy more cheaply, and therefore, not seeking a premium for the service is kind of possible. But also, as I said, and I think hopefully will become more significant as I go on, operators not trying to compete with broadcasters, not trying to compete with cable operators. They weren't trying to replicate the cable TV model. And social networking, games, all those things that we know about Asia really kind of driving the consumer. So a pretty positive story, I think, but not one if you're an operator who's seeking to cover potentially higher costs of deployment than these guys had to deal with in these countries. So the United States, quite a different story. So first of all, the take-up of superfast has been much slower than the take-up of first-generation broadband in the US. So the blue curve there is first gen. That was what the early part of the demand curve looked like. Whereas the superfast has been much flatter, and actually, US take-up is still only at about 10% of all broadband connections. Now, the really interesting thing I think about the US market is the following slide. So this slide shows the take-up of IPTV and the take-up of the superfast service, the fiber service. And as you can see with AT&T, it overlaps completely. So what were they selling? Are they selling superfast broadband, or are they selling IPTV? Were they actually just kind of replicating the cable TV model? Well, when you start to look at the broadband speeds that are available in those packages, actually really pretty modest. Yes, you can upgrade to a higher broadband speed, but then you were charged a whacking big premium to do that. And pretty much the same is true for Verizon. Now, the reason why there's a lag in the IPTV take-up rate, so that the line absolutely mirrors the take-up for superfast, but there's a lag, and the reason for that is is as Verizon deploy into new areas, they have to apply for, once they've deployed, they have to apply for a regional broadcast license. And so there's a time delay in the time period when they can actually start to provide the IPTV service. But the curves are the same. So, if you're taking the broadband, you're taking the IPTV. So, what was selling first? What was the most valuable product? Again, I mean, this is Verizon FTTH. A massive big premium if you wanted to get real super fast connectivity on that fiber. And yet most people aren't. Most people are taking about 15 megabit service on that fiber. So not all fiber is super fast. And I think that's a really important thing to remember. And also in the US, the IPTV market and the broadband markets are highly sort of interdependent. So in summary, it's really that key point, I think, which is don't think that the US necessarily has huge amounts of very high speed connectivity going into lots of households, and this kind of crucial link between what is the thing that they're really selling here. And I think the interesting thing to just sort of ponder on is this kind of issue of the kind of substitutes and other relevant services. If a large part of your revenue is driven by IPTV, to what extent would you really want to enable your consumers to stream other content and access other content from other services that potentially damage your IPT revenues? Just a thought. Let's go to Europe. Wow, I mean, Europe really has made a spectacularly slow start when it comes to superfast broadband. Penetration rates are sort of negligible at this stage, and even when you look at homes passed, the run rate has been fairly modest, and actually the deployment rates have been incredibly slow in some EU countries. So let's just have a look at we'll look at three countries. Look at Germany, France, and the UK. Something kind of similar here about similarity here with what was happening in the US. So first of all, the same thing. You don't get this kind of kick up and take up that we had with first generation. The curve is a lot flatter. And then secondly, look at Deutsche Telekom's model. Once they started deploying. Well, in a way, their deployment strategy, has been to lead with IPTV. So they've really sought to use the fiber network, the FTTC network that they built out. Initially, they only used it for delivering IPTV. The broadband services came along a little bit later, and actually they've been sort of moderately successful. 1.5 million consumers. I mean, nothing amazing, but they've very much kind of really sort of been pushing the IPTV approach, and sort of in a way again replicating the kind of cable TV model, but with the result that their take-up rates in terms of the superfast have been fairly modest. And France is a similar kind of story really. Again, no kick-up in the take-up in the way that we saw it with first generation. And also, actually, France Telecom have been really quite successful in driving IPTV. And the key to that is that, particularly in Paris and some of the larger cities, they've got fairly short copper tails on the network, so they can deliver a pretty high quality service over ADSL. They've been able to deliver a reasonably good managed IPTV service over that network, and that's been the thing that's been selling. Meanwhile, their deployment of fiber, although they've announced lots of ambitions, has been held up by kind of various kind of regulatory issues about how different service providers cooperate to go into multi-dwelling units in places like Paris and so on. And actually, there's been sort of really minimal amounts of fiber service actually being taken up by consumers. The UK might just be looking a little bit different, and I think that maybe has some relevance to New Zealand. Now, word of warning here, though, that the UK is at a much earlier stage of deployment. So it's probably a little bit too early to call in terms of the way the UK is going. But there's a couple of interesting things here. Actually, when you compare superfast take-up to first Gen 8 ADSL, the curves look a little bit more similar. There's a little bit more of a kind of kick there. And again, I mean, BT did the same thing. They tried to put together their BT Vision service, their IPTV service, and they started deploying that back in 2007, and it's sort of trundled along a little bit, but has never made any kind of real impact. But when they started retailing their BT Infinity kind of 40 meg broadband service, actually, they started to get some reasonable take-up. And the interesting thing here is so if you kind of the top right slide kind of shows the curves, and the interesting thing is that the rate of growth now, that suddenly the superfast broadband curve is going more steeper than the IPTV curve, and that was the only market where we could find in Europe where we saw that was the case, which kind of suggests that BT has switched focus a little bit from really focusing on their IPTV to sort of saying, actually, maybe it's broadband that people really want, and maybe that's what we should be really pushing. And probably, and in reality, they had to do it because actually their service was caught horribly in between the BBC, which is a massive free-to-air content, iPlayer, accessible to everybody in the UK, pretty much provides that catch-up TV for anybody who is in the kind of free-to-air market. And then, of course, Sky in the UK, which has all the content rights for sport and so on. And so for anybody who's interested in sport, they're going to go to Sky. So BT was kind of squeezed in the middle. So actually, trying to push their own IPTV story was never going to be particularly successful. And actually, the same thing was true for Virgin Media, the cable operator in the UK. They had the same problem. That all their content, all their TV content came from Sky. Sky charged them a premium for it. They were never going to make a business trying to compete in the TV market with Sky. So what did they do? They started to really focus on broadband, really pushing DOCSIS 3 deployments, and then really sort of setting out to be the fastest broadband provider in the UK. They're upgrading most of their customers. They've got a 50% footprint over the UK in terms of coverage. They're upgrading most of their customers to 50 meg services, making 100 meg services available. And suddenly that's really starting to drive the market and really sort of pushing BT to follow suit. So the UK is looking a little bit different in some of the take-up numbers. And of course, the UK, compared to any other European market, is kind of a wholesale market. So, we have, you don't have these sort of big vertically integrated kind of incumbents that you have in other European markets. BT is forced to be a bit more kind of competitive in terms of the way it plays. So kind of to summarize then what's happening in Europe. Price, yeah, there's tiered pricing, and there is still kind of a significant premium being sought for the kind of top tiers. But importantly, there is a speed differential. There are much higher, those top tiers are significantly higher, faster services than are being offered in the States, for example. The pace of deployment is really slow in Europe, and that's making it a little bit difficult to work out where the consumer demand is. But maybe in some ways it's a reflection of lack of confidence in consumer demand. Bundles, yeah, most operators are focused on triple play, and we're going to see more kind of IPTV services coming into the market. But what is kind of very clear again in Europe is that the market developments in each market seem to be very heavily influenced by what's happening in the free-to-air and pay TV markets. That depends. That determines whether or not operators think there's a business for them there, and whether they want to kind of really go down that IPTV routes. There are some differences there, and there are some anomalies. We want to take a closer look at Sweden. Sweden's got a very different model, localized municipal deployments kind of being aggregated up. You've got higher levels of take-up in Sweden. As I said, UK looks different, wholesale market. And also the impact of the BBC seems to have an impact. And BT are now deploying very fast. I think they're deploying faster than any other operator in the world at the moment. And so it does look like the UK might be onto a slightly different trend. So, a few initial thoughts in terms of what do we think all this stuff means. Well, I think the first one is, well, no surprise really. We're back to that old kind of chicken and egg conundrum. Which comes first, the super fast services and the applications, or the infrastructure and the network. And I think the point here really is that if you think back in terms of the services that are really kind of driving innovation and driving consumer interest today, all the kind of Web 2.0 services, all that innovation happened when really essentially it was when the US market hit that kind of crucial kind of 30, 40, 50% penetration mark. That was the point at which the money started to really come in to behind some of those services. It was the point at which we had the LinkedIn, Skypes, Facebooks, YouTubes, and so on. That was when all that stuff happened. It was when you hit that kind of 30, 40% penetration. And we just haven't reached that point yet. The US hasn't reached that point. Europe's not there. Oh, but Asia is. What does that mean? What are the implications there in terms of some of the innovation that might happen around superfast versus Web 2.0? And then I think the other kind of observation is that most of what people do today simply doesn't need a super fast broadband connection. Yes, it needs a good broadband connection, a good first generation broadband connection. And and if you're on 2 megs or less than that, yeah, sure, you're in trouble. But an 8 megabit, 10 megabit connection will do what most people want it to do. And this is some Ofcom research from their kind of international market research, which pretty much reflects that most people out there are still fairly happy with their existing service. They kind of feel it's not holding them back. They can do a lot of what they want to do. And that's simply because these things were designed to work on this network. They were designed to work within the constraints of first-generation broadband. And it also means that at the moment, most consumers are probably more concerned about value than quality. So again, if services are made available at a premium, there's only a minority of consumers who want to go for that premium because most people are more concerned about paying as little as they can for the access. So, and I think what's happening is that we just really haven't kind of hit that kind of critical mass for Web 3, just to call it something, but for that next phase of innovation. But that's not to say it won't happen. It's not to say it won't happen quite soon. Cool things will come along. We're just not quite there yet. And those companies that I talked about earlier, those Web 2.0 players, they're all very much focusing around mobile and around social at the moment. That's where their big focus is. But that will switch again, and they'll start to think more about kind of what they do with fixed networks as well. And I think there is potentially quite a kind of potent mix of kind of forces at play that is going to drive that innovation. This is a kind of slightly jazzy chart from Gartner, which I pinched from a conference I was at last week. But it's this combination of kind of mobile, of data, cloud, social, Internet of Things. I mean, that really is going to drive quite a revolution in terms of the next generation of services. And we're quite close to some of this stuff. So I'm not sure that we are years away from seeing this kind of Web 3.0 or this next phase of innovation. I think it's fairly close, but it hasn't sort of happened yet in a way that's really driving people's demand for next generation. So my second observation is that TV still has a really big influence on the superfast broadband market. And actually, I think if you really want to understand what's happening in markets around the world for superfast, you really need to understand this. And I deliberately chose something that was fairly complicated. But essentially, this again, it's an Ofcom chart, and it just kind of shows the different way in which different markets are composed in terms of the way in which people access content, really. and the different way in which, so the different strengths of the relative services, whether they're IPTV, cable, analog cable, digital satellite, digital terrestrial. Because when investors and operators are looking at their superfast broadband strategy, how they're going to do it, this is one of the first things they'll look at, which is there room for me to compete in terms of providing an IPTV service? Because if there is that room, then investors understand IPTV revenues. They understand pay TV revenues. And I think in terms of the evolution of the different markets that we've looked at, they're all highly influenced by that domestic context in terms of how is the broadcast kind of market structured, and are there opportunities for entry, or are there barriers to entry, in which case you want to be on the side of the over-the-top guys rather than the IPTV managed service guys. And I think that has a big influence on what we're seeing around the world at the moment. And I think it's a really important point for policymakers and for regulators in particular to think about, okay, well, what are the implications of these kind of close links between these adjacent markets? And is that something you should do something about, or is it just a reality that you have to live with? Now, I'll go back to my UK example. I mean, you could have said that Sky was a problem in the UK because, hey, they had all the sports rights, they had all the premium content rights, they were holding back the development of the market. But actually what really happened was, Virgin Media, the cable operator, said, hang on, we can't compete there. Let's really compete in terms of broadband speed. So they went hell for leather to be, the provider of the fastest broadband services. That then had a really, dynamic impact on BT, sort of forced their hand and forced them to push harder. So sometimes the consequences of these different market structures are quite hard to work out and are a little bit unpredictable. And I think that's a bit of a challenge and a dilemma for governments and for regulators to work out what to do about that. But having said all of that, I still think IPTV is going to be key to short-term demand growth. We see there's definitely demand there for it. Consumers like those services. They like on-demand. They like to be able to. They like catch-up services, and also they like the kind of quality that comes with a managed IPTV service. So in the kind of in the short term, I think IPTV is going to be an important player, and that's certainly going to be the case in the UK. There'll be a service launching in the UK later this year called UView, which is essentially a collaboration between ISPs and the UK broadcasters and BBC in particular to deliver a single platform that integrates digital TV with IPTV and internet apps. It's going to launch in later this year, and certainly BT in all their analyst reports are sort of saying, look, this is going to be a big driver through the rest of this year. TalkTalk, one of the other big ISPs, saying the same. So that, I think, will have a big impact. But because it's really kind of giving BT and others a kind of capability, a kind of content offer that plays to people who wouldn't necessarily want to pay for premium TV, but do want to be able to access catch-up, do want to be able to access free TV, and also maybe willing to pay for some on-demand stuff as well. So I think that's going to be an interesting one to watch in the UK market. But there's also, again, an important point, I think, to think about when we're thinking about IPTV, because, hey, everything out there that you want to watch is there on YouTube, or you can find it anywhere else. I mean, if you're going to charge for this stuff, you've got to make sure it gets to the consumer at a level of quality that they're really willing to pay for. And that's what you can do with IPTV. You can manage that service. You can manage that end-to-end delivery. Because remember, the last mile, the last bit of fiber isn't necessarily the thing that determines the quality of the playthrough. To get really good video playthrough, you've got to have end-to-end quality of service. That's from the originating server all the way through to the end-user device, the set-top box or whatever it is. And actually, consumers want that because they want the quality. They want this thing to work. They want it to play through at a reasonable level of quality, particularly if they're paying for it. But that also, therefore, means that operators are managing that traffic to get it there. So what are the implications of that? What are the implications of of having some of your internet traffic managed. What does that mean for the non-managed traffic? What does that mean for the open internet? I think that's a really key kind of issue. It's one that we're very focused on in the UK and in the BSG, doing quite a lot of work on that. So to sum up, sorry, I've got one more point. I added that, and then I forgot I'd added it. Coming back to this point about is demand going to be higher in rural areas? So if you're going from a really poor broadband, existing broadband service, and suddenly you get super fast made available to you, are you going to have a higher level of take-up, or what difference does that make? We took a whole load of speed test data from different markets, and we looked at kind of average speed today, and then we looked at what happened to take up in those markets. So, sorry, that was historical data. So we looked at kind of average speeds going back 3, 4, 5 years, and then we looked at what happened. So, and there were some markets that had high level of good quality broadband, sort of medium and low quality broadband. And then we looked at the level of take-up in those markets. So we're sort of saying, so in markets where you had pretty poor broadband, did you see a big kick up when superfast came along? We couldn't find any correlation. We ran the data several times. We looked at it in all sorts of different ways. We just couldn't find any correlation. The data didn't really kind of make any sense to us, so we really don't know the answer to that one. However, Basingstoke in the UK, if we want to go the other way, let's look at a sort of micro kind of example. Basingstoke, it's not exactly rural. It's not far from London, sort of a suburban area, but has had historically terrible broadband. Simply because of the way in which the exchanges that were built to serve the town and the way in which the town then developed. It just wasn't fit for purpose. But it was interesting. So when BT did go there and they put in their fibre service, they did see immediately, they saw the highest levels of take-up on any of their cabinets anywhere in the country. So that did seem to be an example. Okay, it's a very small-scale, localized example, but it did seem to be an example of where you had an area that had really poor quality broadband. Suddenly, you improved the capability, and there was a big rush to take it up. That we couldn't find any correlation when we looked at the big numbers, but on this micro one, we thought, well, maybe that's interesting. So, indeed, to sum up. 3 things, really. I think the first thing is, look, levels of take-up vary considerably across different markets. There's no sort of common experience so far emerging from different markets around the world. These variations are driven very much by the market conditions in each country. What's happening locally, directly in the broadband market, but also in the adjacent markets. And indeed, digital TV seems to have a big impact on both the strategies of the operators and the consumer response to the products that come into the market. So that's the first one. The second one is really that actually we kind of get the sense that supply in some ways is a little bit ahead of demand here. Despite all the evangelizing, despite everything we heard this morning about how transformational this stuff is going to be, it does seem for a lot of consumers that actually maybe things aren't working out too badly. These services are coming along at a time, just kind of when they want them. As I said, good first generation broadband seems to deliver for a lot of customers, and therefore a lot of the focus still remains on value for money. So you have a choice. You can deploy fast and cheap. So you don't go for a premium, you just try and roll out as quickly as possible, and you try and get as big a market share as you can. Or you go the other route where you say, okay, well, we're going to charge a premium, and we're going to maybe develop the market more slowly. But I guess what I'm saying here is that don't panic if you don't see demand ramping up really quickly as services go into the market. That hasn't been the experience in most markets around the world, apart from the markets where, as I said, they've gone fast and cheap and got high levels of take-up. But on a positive note, I don't think supply is that far ahead of demand. Clearly, there are lots of examples of lots of interesting innovation coming. The cloud is going to have a transformational impact More and more people's lives are being lived in the cloud. More of their stuff sits in the cloud. They need to access it more and more often. And I think that will be kind of the killer app. I think it will just be the fact that, I need this broadband so often for so many things. It's worth paying extra to make sure I've got the best broadband I can get. And I think that is how things will play out in the longer term. In the shorter term, I think IPTV will have quite a big difference, and therefore it's worth thinking about about how that market works within each of your markets. And on that, that was everything I had prepared to say. So happy to take some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Look, we've got 10 minutes for questions of clarification. We do have a panel later on in which Anthony will be participating, so things that are going to make the conversation flow can perhaps wait. But it's more about specifics of things that were raised. Do we have any questions on that basis? I've got one over there. You can give the microphone to that gentleman. There was one over here somewhere. Wave your hand again. Was there one over there? No, it was just myth. Okay.
Hi, Oliver Smith, Telecom. When you looked at the impact of the relative pricing, was it mostly just looking at the impact of the difference in the monthly pricing, or did you also look at the cost of installation and how that impacted demand?
I think we're looking at the monthly pricing. Again, there are so many variables that it's quite hard to kind of break out all those impacts. But I guess the way to kind of go forward is kind of almost look at the kind of total costs of adoption and ownership. But I think for this study, we just kind of pretty much looked at the monthly costs.
Was there another question over here? If not, I have...
There's one at the back there, I think.
One at the back, sorry.
Yes, I had some questions about some of the qualitative content of your take-up studies, not just the quantitative, but the qualitative. So when you look at the different chronologies of take-up, what are you talking about here? Is it university to university? Is it state structures? Is it financial networks, manufacturing? In other words, I just wanted to get a sort of a general picture of what parts of the economy, what parts of society are more likely to get ultra-fast broadband first.
We were simply looking at consumer take-up. So, these are kind of straight adoption numbers as they're reported by operators around the world. So essentially, this was kind of the consumer market. Inevitably, that also includes a lot of small businesses that wouldn't take a bespoke kind of business product, but definitely rely on kind of consumer broadband for running their businesses. And they're a really important part of the economy. And actually, they're the bit of the economy that broadband's been most transformational for. So I think they really matter, but those numbers tend to be wrapped up in just the general consumer numbers.
I think we've sort of run out of time for questions unless there's one more at this stage. If not, can I just ask you to thank Anthony one more time?